Late. Once again, welcome to today's Appraisal Buzz webinar sponsored by Clear Capital. Low volume means high demand for appraisal quality. 6 tips for success in 2023. Our presenters today are Ken Folven. Ken is presently serving as the Senior Director for Quality Assurance at Clear Capital. In his role heading quality assurance for Clear Capital, he's responsible for delivering exceptional client experience and inspiring high-performing teams. Todd Ewert is a certified residential appraiser with 13 years of field experience with organizations such as World Savings and Wells Fargo. Todd, I'll hand it over to you and let you finish the introductions and get started.
Great. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it. Ken, nice to see you again. And hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Like Jim said, my name is Todd Ewert, Senior Staff Appraiser. I've been with Clear Capital for about 8 years now. I'm joined by Ken Folven, our Senior Director of Appraisal Quality Assurance. Ken, we're here today. Our discussion is going to be somewhat of a companion piece to an article that you've recently published in a popular real estate publication, the title of which is Appraisal Quality, 6 Tips for Success in 2023. Of course, I've read the article. I've got my questions ready. But before we dig into it, and I should remind the audience, as Jim said, we're going to have some poll questions along the way, and we intend on leaving some room for Q&A at the end of the discussion today, too. Before we jump into the 6 tips, Ken, which I'll get those on the screen here. You're in a pretty good position as you work with the GSEs on basically a daily basis, as well as lenders and banks on a national level. You see things from a pretty high level, but you've also got a granular perspective too. So let's begin with the high level. Why is this a timely article? You know, appraisers out there are saying, well, I thought appraisal quality was important all the time. And of course, they're right. Appraisers also understand there's always a balance between quality and timeliness, and the pendulum does swing back and forth depending on the environment that we're in. So let's kick things off with kind of a high-level overview of where we are and why quality now at this time.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. Certainly, this is a big topic for us all. I'd say, you know, in a lower in volume environment as the industry is experiencing today, it's really becoming more common for banks, lenders, and AMCs alike to conduct more due diligence efforts around valuation quality. The reality is that when volume is lower, it's not uncommon to see revision requests that maybe you hadn't seen as much of prior. Underwriters have more time. Additionally, it's important to be aware of that market conditions are softening, and that is something to be mindful of as it can present additional risk for our lenders that we're doing work for. So while valuation quality has always been paramount, there's now increased importance on the credibility of the appraisal process. I'd say not only are the intended users of the appraisal report looking for reassurance on the accuracy of the value conclusions, but they're also looking to minimize their repurchase risks with the GSEs. And in a nutshell, everyone's looking to make sure that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed in the appraisal process today. So in my quality assurance role, I know firsthand that the post-delivery revision request can add approximately 5 days to the underwriting process. That's a lot of time, and all stakeholders are routinely working to try to identify ways to minimize those delays. And as an appraiser myself, I know how time-consuming these revision requests can be. So as a result, it's really important for us as appraisers and as the industry to adapt to the new norm, increase our own due diligence efforts, and help improve the credibility of the appraisals we complete. And this is why we really want to highlight today some simple yet effective strategies to help appraisers to be successful. We want to minimize the number of revision requests that you receive and help you maximize your volume potential in 2023.
You bring up some good points. You know, speed and quality are often viewed as opposing forces, but to your point, quality really does equal speed, because questions about quality, as you just said, delay a report about 5 days, and that's something that that lenders would like to avoid. So all very good points. Well, let's jump in with our first of 6 tips. Measure twice, cut once. Generally pretty good advice, Ken. This would seem to speak to preparation. So what can an appraiser do? What does measure twice, cut once in terms of preparing for an appraisal assignment? What can an appraiser do between acceptance of the assignment and inspection of the subject to ensure that problems are avoided down the road?
Yeah, the point of this tip here is to learn as much as you can about the home before the inspection. So do your homework. Carefully read that letter of engagement when you're assigned that order. And I know that at times these letters of engagement, they can be long and hard to read sometimes, but they often do contain really critical information. So if you run into questions during the assignment process or early on, refer back to that letter of engagement, because oftentimes it's going to contain some important directions there. So it can also help provide you a way to figure out how to proceed with an assignment. So if you run into a situation where maybe you're appraising a home and it has an accessory unit and you aren't sure all of the requirements that you need to fulfill around accessory unit, refer back to that letter of engagement. And if it's something that's long, do a keyword search for accessory unit and try to find that information in the LOE. So that's gonna be a good place to start and refer to give you some referrals on where you can find some direction on that. Also, another tip as it relates to this is, again, going back and doing your pre-inspection homework, but when you're going to call that point of contact and set up that inspection, take advantage of that time with that point of contact on the phone and ask them questions at that point. Try to find out about the upgrades, any recent upgrades to the home, the length of ownership, any questions that you think you might find valuable. Try to get that information addressed when you're making that contact to set up that inspection.
Ken, I'll mention that in my conversations with appraisers, I'm surprised to hear how underutilized the pre-inspection interview is. It's really, you're really getting information from the absolute source who has intimate knowledge of the home. So I wanted just to emphasize tip number 2, because it really does seem underutilized based on conversations I've had.
Yeah, I think a lot of times with the amount of information we have available to us at our fingertips, appraisers often think that they can just get that information by doing some research, but it's, very valuable to speak with that point of contact to get that information, or at minimum validate some of this information that you're finding. One other critical recommendation on this top is to review aerial photos, aerial imagery of the subject property and comparable sales that you're going to be using. That's a key benefit to doing that pre-inspection homework. A big revision request we often see from many different customers is around questioning externalities that are nearby the subject property. So doing that research ahead of time, looking at the aerial photos for any commercial properties that might be nearby. And then when you're out on your physical inspection, validate that information. But finding that stuff out ahead of time might help you identify alternative sales to use. And the customers are generally going to want to know what type of influence that has on marketability. So doing that research, finding those things out ahead of time, and then incorporating that into your inspection process by validating is another important step. So in summary, it's really around this tip here is around doing all of your pre-inspection homework and then validating that during the inspection process.
Externalities, as you know, consistently in the top 5 revisions. And now what we're seeing is, and to your earlier point, reviewers having more time to review reports. They're not just picking on the subject, but picking on externalities that might be surrounding the comparables as well. So that last one is a great one. And like I mentioned, the top 5 pretty consistently in terms of top revisions. Well, let's press on to tip number 2 then. Tip number 2 is use technology and templates to save time. So Ken, in my experience, the most efficient appraisers have been those that are able to adapt to new technology and incorporate it into their practice. And as well, those that manage to create some specialized templates, for example, a template just for FHA as opposed to a template for conventional lending. Technology and templates. What can appraisers do today? And with full understanding that change is sometimes hard and not everyone wants to adapt to the new technology, right? We're all creatures of habit, right? So what can appraisers do today to use these things to their advantage? Let's talk about how they can improve their efficiency in their practices.
Yeah, there's a lot of different technology tools out there in the marketplace that can create efficiency for appraisers. So I would encourage our audience, our appraisers out there to explore that stuff, find out what might work for you. There's digital tools that can help save you time, help keep you organized. There's mobile measuring applications out there like Kubicasa that can streamline the measuring process, provide improved output for you, whether that's the sketch or the floor plan, and provide ANSI-aligned GLA. That can all translate into faster inspection times, fewer revision requests, and increased productivity for you. You know, an example of that, Todd, is it's not uncommon for us to hear a little bit about Kubicasa and get some feedback on that. And, you know, we've heard testimonials from appraisers that use Kubicasa on very complex or unique assignments that may normally take them an hour or two to physically measure, drop the sketch, get that all ready to go, where using something like Kubicasa to do the scan can really reduce that time into 10 or 15 minutes. And that's all time that's valuable to the appraiser. So that's one example of some of the tools that are out there for appraisers to take advantage of. We also, there's also applications out there like Total for Mobile, as an example, is another one that's used pretty frequently. And that really allows the appraiser to be mobile and develop their personalized templates while they're out on the inspection. So that's another effective approach that appraisers use pretty frequently to help save them time, but improve consistency of the report as they're able to start filling out certain aspects of that appraisal report while they're might be out in the field.
Good tips overall. And thinking about it, it wasn't that long ago that we saw our last pencil sketch come through Clear Capital for review. So if that's just any indication as to how there can be a lot of resistance in adapting to new technology or new methods of doing things. And so you mentioned Kubicasa. I want to, you know, in full disclosure to the audience, of course, Kubicasa is a subsidiary of Clear Capital. And to your point, Ken, there's a webinar out there now. We're going to link to it at the end of the presentation, presented by Kubicasa. It shows a demonstration of a ridiculously complex subject property that would probably, Ken, I would be out there with my high school geometry book, putting stakes in the ground, trying to figure this thing out. Kubicasa was able to knock it out in about 15 or 20 minutes. So it may, at risk of sounding self-serving, and apologies to the audience in advance, but I'm thinking about the possibility of an appraiser out there who might be, you know, encountering difficulties. We're about to get into the dead of winter here, right? Some climate challenges, ice, snow, the blazing heat of summer, certain physical limitations, navigating terrain. I mean, there might be an appraiser who might find a technological, you know, advanced tool like this to be critical in helping advance and continue a very well-deserved and well-earned career. You know, as appraisers, we don't like to move personal property out of the way. We don't like to climb ladders that are too high. We care about our own safety. And being able to provide an ANSI-compliant floor plan with interior walls from the comfort of an air-conditioned or heated subject property, that could seriously prolong a career to an appraiser. So again, forgive the somewhat blatant promotion, but I'm thinking about if we're here to improve lives, I want that one appraiser that might benefit from hearing this to hear this. So.
Yeah, gone are the days of a frozen pen, right? And you don't have to worry about that. And I can relate to that appraising in Minnesota. So yes, I encourage everyone to at least give it a try.
At least check out the video that we're going to post at the end. If nothing else, it's a great watch.
Yeah.
Well, pressing on to tip number 3. Ken, some would say this is an area where I'm a little bit challenged. Be concise in your commentary. So what does it mean to be concise in your commentary? I want to point to the first sentence of actually the article that you wrote that begins with tip number 3. Have template comments grown like weeds in an attempt to fend off the dreaded recurring revision requests. This is a very common approach that we have seen. An appraiser doesn't want to get the same revision twice, so they say, darn it, I'm going to go ahead and put a template comment so no one ever asks me about my sales that are over 6 months old again. Might seem like a good idea at the time, but it presents its own set of problems and may result in even more revisions. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the approach of adding to one's template like weeds in an attempt to avoid revisions. Does that work? And if not, why not?
Yeah, this one really is all about being concise, avoiding the generalized commentary, and keeping the comments assignment specific. And we'll probably keep coming back to that theme throughout our discussion today, but it's really around keeping your commentary relevant to the assignment that you're appraising. It's not necessary to restate commentary from the signed certification or the limiting condition. We see that oftentimes where appraisers might be just re-emphasizing or regurgitating some of the same information that's already there. So avoid that. You know, my recommendation is to avoid that type of generalized commentary. And you noted this, Todd, just a minute ago, but oftentimes we see appraisers, I mean, as appraisers, we want to avoid revision requests. And in doing so, one of the ways that appraisers often try to do that is by adding commentary to their templates from prior revisions that they've received. So, and that can add over years worth of unnecessary or additional commentary to a report. And where that can become a problem is it starts to cause, or it can cause, some confusion for the reader. It can actually create additional questions at times. And if and when those comments that are provided in the appraisal report are not really assignment specific and they're too generalized, it starts to lessen the credibility of the report for the reader. So I would encourage everyone to be mindful of the commentaries that they provide. Sometimes less is actually more in this case.
I agree with you. And template comments are easy to spot. And you talk about credibility, and I know in my experience in having conversations with appraisers around the country, appraisers just want to be believed when they say something. But the key to credibility and the key to believability and earning the trust of the individual reading the report to make a collateral lending decision, I think, is to use more assignment specific commentary. You know, it's, forgive the sports analogy, but it's hard to score points when you're on defense. And so putting a lot of barriers up in an effort to avoid revision requests, it's not quite as effective or confidence inspiring as it is to take a more offensive mindset, if you will, and include more commentary separate from the template commentary that is more assignment specific about the specific comps you're using, the adjustments that you're making, and your reconciliation of value, which these are all themes we're going to hit on. Actually, our kind of middle section of the tips here all have to do with commentary. Yep. So we'll kind of continue with this theme on the next one. Was there anything else?
I might suggest, Todd, before we move on, just a couple best practices on this that I think you know, can be important for our audience to hear. But I'd suggest and recommend appraisers consider organizing their supporting commentary by adjustment rather than comparable sale number. And what I mean by that, or as an example, would be if you're going to make condition adjustments to comparable sales, consider providing a heading for condition, and then itemizing each comparable sale underneath that heading with the explanation of your adjustment. That really helps keep your report consistent when you're doing that for all of the different types of adjustments that you're applying. That helps keep your report consistent, easy to follow, and easy to understand. And that's really important to minimize revision requests, is to try to keep your report easy to follow and understand. The easier report is to follow, the less likelihood there is of you receiving a revision request for something that you may already have included in your report. So again, keep things simple, but keep them effective.
Okay. So essentially you're suggesting, as opposed to comparable 1, comparable 2, lists your adjustments kind of in the order displayed in the Fannie Mae form by element of comparison top to bottom. Does make for a cleaner read and an easier to understand report. I'd have to agree with you there.
Yeah, and where that can also be beneficial is if at a later date you need to swap out a comparable or you add comparable sales, it's a lot easier to go back in and just add some commentary about that rather than trying to reread everything you wrote and figure out which comparable you may have added and adjust commentary accordingly. So it also helps for that if you do get a request down the road.
Good advice for sure. Well, let's continue with the commentary theme here. We'll move on to tip number 4, which is explain how, not just why. So this would seem to speak to adjustment commentary specifically. So maybe we can help appraisers out here. Sometimes there's a little bit of confusion when an appraiser receives a revision request asking for more support for an adjustment. There is a comment in the report specific to that adjustment, but someone on the other end is asking for more or suggesting to the appraiser they need more support. So let's try to parse out the how and the why. When an appraiser is faced with that situation, what would you say most often is missing that would satisfy the end user?
Yeah, this is a common issue I think we all see in the quality assurance space when we're reading appraisal reports, and it has been for a while, but oftentimes appraisers will provide commentary that's really just restating the obvious. And what I mean by that, or an example of that, is it's not uncommon for an appraiser to, if they're going to be adjusting for condition as an example, it's not uncommon to see a statement from the appraiser to say, comparables number 2 and 3 have been adjusted $10,000 for being inferior in condition. And when I'm talking about restating the obvious, that's a good example, because we can already tell as a reader of the report that you've adjusted $10,000 for that comparable being inferior by reading the sales comparison approach.
Right. And it's easier to look at a picture, i.e. the grid, than it is to have to read that comment, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So, paying attention to what information is already disclosed in that sales comparison grid, there's really no need to restate the obvious. I believe that the intended users of the report, the reader of the report, they really want 2 things as it relates to adjustment support. It's the why and the how, I would say, are the 2 things. So if you can keep that in mind, the why is, ask yourself, why was an adjustment actually necessary? Figure that out, and then disclose what are the specifics that make that comparable inferior or superior. Making sure you disclose that information. What did you actually observe about that comparable sale? That's around the why. So that's the first aspect that I think is important. And then the second one is the how. How was that adjustment derived or supported? What data are you using that supports the adjustment that was made? I really do think that explaining this information for the adjustments that you're making, it goes a long way in providing a well-supported and credible report. And I'm very confident that if you keep those 2 things in mind when you're making adjustments, it's really going to help minimize revision requests on that topic.
Simple but effective. It really does come down to the qualitative and the quantitative. What did you observe? And how did you get the dollar amount? Right?
Yep, you got it.
Simple, but not always easy. All right, well, let's move on to our final commentary-related tip. And this one is my personal favorite. I got to be honest with you. Tip number 5 is explain the final value conclusion. Looking forward to your take on how some appraisers might get tripped up along the way, or at least maybe the reader might get lost along the way when it comes to leading the reader from the sales comparison adjusted range of values to the final value conclusion. How would you advise an appraiser to construct a convincing reconciliation of value? And maybe we can also discuss some things that you would recommend appraisers avoid.
Yeah, I know you said this is your favorite, Todd. This is one I'm passionate about too, because I think it goes a long way as in helping prevent revision requests. And I'll explain what I mean by that. But if you think about this, like after all the hard work an appraiser has gone through in developing their appraisal report, and that's anything from market conditions to selecting the comparable sales and the adjustment, the reconciliation is that last piece to kind of tie it all together, bring it all home, and provide a conclusion that's easily understood. I really do feel like a strong reconciliation can proactively address many questions a reader of the report might have. So it's a good habit to discuss in the final reconciliation statements, disclose the weighting of the sales and why. And an example of that is explain what the dominant features are of that subject property and how do those compare to the comparable sales that you've selected. Is that dominant feature, if the subject does have a dominant feature, disclose what it is, but is that, might be view, it could be location, it could be architectural style. And there can be many things that really drive value on for that assignment or that market, but to make sure that you're disclosing that information in your reconciliation. Bring all of that forward in your reconciliation and disclose which comparables might also have that same dominant feature. That's going to really start tying things together in terms of why you selected the sales that you did, which ones are being weighted the most and why, because some might share or have that similar dominant feature. That's going to bring the reader of the report to be able to understand how you reached that value conclusion and why.
It sounds like what you're advocating for is very much a qualitative analysis, a characteristic-based analysis. And, as we know, gone are the days where it is acceptable to say equal weight given to all comps. Fannie Mae specifically advises against deriving a value conclusion based on a straight average. And even gross adjustments. I know it's very common to look at gross adjustments as the end all be all of similarity. And in some cases that's true, but there are other cases in which a characteristic based analysis would be more informative to the reader. So is it safe to say that a qualitative analysis might be arguably the best way to promote reader understanding of what's driving value for the subject?
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. I mentioned this previously on this topic, but I want to restate it because I think it's important. But a detailed reconciliation will proactively address many of the questions someone from the writing may have with the report, and it can actually help minimize the reconsideration of value requests that one might receive. As an appraiser, I understand that as it relates to reconsideration of value requests, I can relate to those add additional time to your process to go back in and address days after maybe you've submitted that report. So if you can think about it this way, discussing why you've selected the sales that you did, bringing out that dominant feature aspect, discussing the weighting of those sales is really going to help eliminate the possibility of someone sending you additional sales that do not have those same features or aspect. So if you can think about it that way, you're addressing things that are similar. Hopefully on the back end, someone isn't going to send you one of those sales because they can tell that it doesn't have the same view or it's not in that same location as the subject is. That's just going to help avoid some of those requests coming back your way.
That is a great point. And it reminds me of a lot of conversations that I have with appraisers with regard to complex properties that result in an unavoidable wide range of value. We always encourage appraisers, don't make adjustments that you can't support, of course. So a great detailed qualitative reconciliation can really make up for the lack of an ability to adjust to a narrow range, informing that reader why you chose the value that you did within this wide range. You talk about instilling confidence. So really a great reconciliation really can make up for, kind of an ugly sales grid. So
yeah,
great.
Exactly. And again, going back to what we've already touched on, avoid those generalized statements too, and keep it assignment specific. And that ties in with the reconciliation here as well.
Good stuff. Well, Ken, why have a top 5 when we can have a top 6?
I like it.
So run a quick check before hitting send. Now, Ken, it's late. I've spent hours writing this complicated report. I'm tired. And I don't want to see this report again. So what can I do in this moment that is going to give me somewhat of an advantage, give me the best chance of not making one of those, I can't believe I did that type of mistakes. Give me some sort of a backstop that will help me avoid future revisions before I send this thing off.
Yeah, this is a big opportunity, Todd, for everyone. And although it seems really simple, I can tell you that, you know, a very, very large percentage of the revision requests can be avoided by simply proofreading the appraisal report. And that's not just proofreading for spelling errors, but proofreading for things like consistency in your commentary, double checking that you're not missing any exhibits from the report, that all photos are provided and properly labeled, making sure that those photos have the correct labels on them. All of those things are what I'm referring to as running that quick check before you're hitting send. There's some real common unforced errors that we see that all appraisers make, or frequently make, I should say, and that's around the missing photos, the half bathroom photo, right? You see that too, Todd, right? The missing half bathroom photo is a common one.
Either the sketch or the photo, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Or conflicting information on an exposure time statement that you have in the report. You might have an exposure time statement in two places of the report, but the comments conflict with one another. So another one is the location map. That's a good example, is making sure that your location map has accurately represented the right comparables on the report, because you may have swapped out sales during your process, and you want to make sure, if you're having 5 sales in your sales comparison approach, that those 5 sales are what is represented on the location map.
You like to switch your comps to make it look as pretty as possible. Yeah, running that location map as a last final step is certainly good advice.
Yeah. Yeah, and kind of the last one on this is, if you're working with an AMC that provides those pre-delivery rules or pre-submission rules to you during that submission process, take a minute or two and review those rules. Certainly, you're going to find that there are times when that information is already addressed in your appraisal report. But it's not uncommon for us to get feedback from appraisers that they do rely on those as a final check and validation to their report writing. A lot of successful appraisers do lean on those rules, again, as that final step and validation. So spending a few minutes there, reviewing those rules, going back through and checking your report can really save you a lot of time on the back end.
Good advice. A lot of times those rules are sharing data that the AMC might have, and validating or invalidating that data ahead of time. Although it is an extra step, it can certainly save time on that revision on the back end.
Yeah, they could tie into things like customer-specific requirements, common errors that appraisers might make. So yeah, I think it's well worth the time on reviewing that information. So, I would say in conclusion on this, Todd, as an appraiser, I know firsthand that no one likes to receive revision requests on their report, because they can be time consuming. So I really can relate to that. But I also know that as someone who's been in the quality assurance space for a long time and has worked with a lot of different lenders, that working to proactively minimize those revision requests through additional due diligence is really important to the process. So I'm confident that by incorporating some of these best practices that we've gone through today and some of these suggestions into the appraiser's process will drive additional work your way. It's going to create efficiencies for you as the appraiser, and it's going to help you to be more successful in 2023.
I agree. These are some great tips. I think the article is very timely, and I certainly hope that our audience finds some of these tips to be helpful. Ken, let's take a second to visit our poll questions. I kind of want to take a look at the results here. With regard to the letters of engagement, most of our audience finds them useful, which is nice to see. Of course, it contains a lot of critical information necessary to complete the assignment, but hopefully the searching of particular features is a helpful tip to make those even more useful. And it looks like the majority of our audience does enjoy the use of templates, with about 25% cloning reports. Another very popular method. I would just caution all those that like to clone reports, just be careful of that data being carried over from a previous report that might not apply to the one you're working on.
Yep. Yeah.
Great. Thank you all for participating in the polls.
Yeah, some good information there.
Well, Ken, this pretty much wraps it up. I think we've got some extra time for some Q&A. What do you say? You want to hang around for a little bit longer?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's answer a few questions.
All right. Ken, I'll throw this first one to you. Does Clear Capital review revision requests before you send them to the appraiser? So a request comes in from the lender. What's our process before forwarding it on?
Yeah, the simple answer is yes, we do. And the reason behind that is we're here to help protect the appraiser from any potential undue influence on that request. Some lenders have a very good process on their end for scrubbing those requests before they're sent over to the AMC, and others may not. So it's our job as an AMC to help protect the appraiser there from any undue influence. So we do review those requests. We may rephrase something in a way that's more impactful to the appraiser, but certainly we're going to ask that revision request of the customer, but we're going to put a set of eyes on it before it goes out to the appraiser.
Certainly. All right. Well, our second question. Does Clear Capital review alternate sales prior to sending them to the appraiser?
Yeah, that's a good question. We hear that one a lot, just in discussions with our appraisers. Mm-hmm. I would say if it's related to like a reconsideration of value request, which is probably one of the more common requests we're seeing nowadays, is the request to address alternate sales. I'm not going to say they're comparable sales, but I'll say they're alternate sales, because the reality is it's the appraiser's job to determine if those sales are comparable or not. That's not our job as the AMC to make that distinction or that call. So we are not going to opine on the similarity of that comparable sale or not, or that sale. We're going to defer to the appraiser to make that judgment. It's the appraiser's appraisal report. It's not ours. So again, we're going to defer to the appraiser as the local market expert there on the comparability of any given sale.
I guess I might add to that, Ken. A lot of sales that are sent to appraisers, I've noticed, are very commonly very proximate to the subject, sometimes more proximate to sales in the report. Now, that may or may not be relevant depending on the market, of course. But I think it's important to keep in mind, and maybe helpful to keep in mind, Fannie Mae does emphasize the relevance of proximity in valuation. Now, there's a trade-off anytime that you select a comparable, of course. One might be a little older, but maybe it's very close. One might be very similar in style, but maybe it's a lot larger. And so it's up to the appraiser to determine what the trade-off is, what the appropriate trade-off is. Probably a good idea to keep in mind that there is a somewhat of a lean toward proximity. And if proximity is not the driving factor for your particular subject property, you might head off a revision request by letting the end user know that although there were some sales that were more proximate, in this market, the relevance of proximity is de-emphasized in light of other factors. And so it's not always the most important thing, but knowing that that's kind of the starting point can be a great place for an appraiser to begin an argument. So
yeah.
Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, that's a good point, Todd. And I mean, just from the perspective of someone in quality assurance, but also lenders that we've talked with a lot, location is a big one, obviously. But everyone is pulling additional sales data from the subject's market or neighborhood. So yes, paying attention to what has sold in a close proximity to the subject property is certainly important. And if you can disclose them, maybe why some of those sales weren't used, that's another good way to avoid getting a revision on something too. If there is, say, a neighboring property that sold recently, but you're not using it, you might want to take the time and address that one now, because most likely someone's going to have a question on that.
Yeah, you can't address every sale, of course, but a section in the addendum with the title Sales Considered But Not Used is a great way to often earn the trust and really demonstrate an appraiser's diligence in an appraisal report. All right, well, we'll move on to the next question. I use a weighted average. Why do I keep getting revision requests? This is a great question. So, Ken, I'll take a shot at this one if it's all right with you.
Yeah.
And I'll try to keep it short as best I can. The weighted average is a very, very common technique in appraisal. It's, by weighted average, I'm referring to the automatically generated conclusion based on, gross adjustments of comparables. And I love having these discussions with appraisers. I would argue that the weighted average technique is only as reliable as the subject property and the comparables are conforming with each other. Because in that case, an appraiser can be fairly confident that the gross adjustments are representative of the totality of adjustments that exist in a market. When we start talking about more complex properties, wider ranges of value, different builders, different locations, different value driving components, we've all had that appraisal where we're just trying to find a comp 3. The weighted average in that case may be less reliable, because although an appraiser does the best they can to extract every adjustment they can, there's no guarantee the appraiser is extracting the totality of adjustments that exist. We're just doing the best we can. We're only doing what we can support and what we can observe. There might still be some other market reaction left on the table. And if that's the case, the gross adjustment doesn't represent the totality of market reaction. And so to base a value conclusion on what could potentially be an incomplete gross adjustment total might lend itself to a conclusion that's kind of floating in the middle somewhere, rather than one that is more tethered to characteristics, right? Appraisers often feel safe when their value conclusion is in the middle of a wide range. It's not too high, it's not too small. But really on the collateral side, it's considered perhaps untethered, unless, of course, it's tethered to a comparable that's in the middle with a similar value driving conclusion. So kind of to the point we were making earlier, the more complex property we're appraising, in this one appraiser's humble opinion, the less reliable the automatic gross adjustment value becomes, and a characteristic-based conversation with the reader about what drives value in the subject market and which comps are more similar. I see far more reports come back as revisions than when we try to use a weighted average as a tool where that tool really is not well placed. Hopefully that wasn't too long, was it? I did the best I could.
You nailed it, Todd.
All right. Now we've got one more here. I use regression analysis to determine support and adjustments. Similar question. I'm using regression. Isn't that math? Why am I getting revision requests? This is kind of, I'm not an expert. I'll full disclosure, I'm not a statistician and not an expert in regression analysis. When I was actively practicing, I didn't use it a ton. But the problems that I have seen on the review side are, it's similar to the weighted average we just talked about. The conclusion is only as good as your inputs. And so in a low data environment, it is really difficult to extract certain characteristics regardless of the sophistication of the formula. So, the output doesn't always make sense in light of the larger picture, I guess is the best that I could say. Just ensure that your data inputs, the quality of your data going into your regression analysis is really sufficient to provide a reliable result.
Yeah, I'd maybe just add to that, Todd, that you really need to understand what you're using, what are the inputs that are going into that regression analysis. And if you're going to rely on that output, you really need to understand everything that's going into it. And generally speaking, the ones that I've seen, they're relatively complex. And I don't know all that's going into how that is being calculated. So therefore I wouldn't use one because I couldn't reproduce that adjustment somehow. So We do have one other question here, Todd, that I don't know if you saw it pop up, but I think it's a good one. We can address this last question here if we got time.
Sure, let it rip.
Yeah, so the question is, do quality reports mean more orders? Are orders solely based on best quotes given? Good question. I would say I can't speak for all appraisal management companies, but I can speak on behalf of what we do here at Clear Capital. We are always looking for the best qualified appraiser to do the assignment. You always have the opportunity to request a higher fee for an assignment if you don't think the fee that you've been asked is sufficient. But appraisers have scorecards. We keep track of how an appraiser performs from both a turn time and quality perspective. And those are components that go into soliciting appraisers for more orders. So I would say, it's a well-rounded picture there in terms of what we're looking for. But, certainly I want to get the point across to everyone that if you can help minimize the number of revision requests you receive, that's likely a significant factor that's going to help drive more orders your way. It's less revisions that the customer has to come back for. Most customers have scorecards that they kind of grade the AMC on, and revision requests are one of those components. So the goal is the lender wants to receive as many appraisal reports on time without the need to send a correction request back.
Pretty solid answer. Does that wrap it up for our questions for the day?
Yeah, I mean, I see we're getting a few more are coming in, but I'm not sure if we have time to cover one or two more.
Well, if we still have time, let's keep it going.
Yeah, we have time for about 2 more questions.
Oh, great. Thank you, Tim. All right. Let's see here. Here's a question. How acceptable is a value conclusion range versus a fixed value estimate? Well, at least in the world that we work in the lending world, lenders do require a fixed value estimate. There may be some assignments out there where a range is appropriate, but at least as far as in the general lending world, it's a single representative number on the bottom line.
Yep, I agree, Todd, there. It would be nice in some circumstances to have a range that you could provide, but lenders generally are looking for a specific number there. All right.
Let's see. Well, we'll tackle one more here. We're supposed to have market reaction for our adjustments. How do you make quality and condition adjustments when it is subjective and difficult to find a market reaction for that? Great question. Difficult to answer in generality. Tough to answer too specifically, but generally speaking, I think Ken's tip offered some great insight into the qualitative aspect of supporting adjustments. Condition and quality are things that are observable. And explaining the differences of what you see, what upgrades you see, quality adjustments in particular can be difficult to describe. And I'll share this with the audience. I've had a lot of conversations with appraisers that say, look, I know this property is of higher quality. I just don't know how to explain it. Well, tell me what you see. Well, I see a lot of intricate roof peaks. I see the fenestration around the home. There's a lot of French doors, all these aspects. And usually my answer is say exactly what you just said, because a reader will understand those elements of higher quality. So that kind of handles the why. What did you observe? Don't feel intimidated if you don't understand a lot of construction terminology. Just explain in plain English what you see. And then as far as the how, well, things get a little more complicated there. Of course, the match pair analysis when possible to extract. If one property sold for more than another, and you can identify that the main difference between the two is because of the quality or because of the condition, match pairing is not an exact science. In my commentary, I would always say that I was match pairing within a range one similar comparable to one that was different. So it really does, we start getting into the nuance here. And it's, like I said, it's tough to get specific on such a general question, but I would begin with a very qualitative explanation of what you see, and then just walk the reader through your process. It could be related to the cost of the components. It could be based on a matched pair analysis, just depends on your circumstance.
Yep. I think that was a good response, Todd. We do have one more question that let's try to sneak this one in. That's probably one that's on everyone's mind. And what is the prediction in terms of volume for 2023?
How's your crystal ball?
It's pretty foggy. I don't know. Is yours more clear than mine?
Mine's got a crack in it.
This is a good question. I would say, just from my perspective on things that I'm hearing, take it only from me. I think we're going to see with the interest rates where they're at right now. I think we're going to see things a little bit slower in the early part of 2023. Hopefully things will start to pick up a little bit as the year progresses. I do envision a little bit of a change or transition in terms of the type of products that are going to be ordered. So I can envision maybe a little bit fewer of our traditional full appraisal reports, as some will say, and a transition over to more hybrid types of assignments or desktop appraisals. I think we're going to see that continue into 2023. So I think it's going to be a little slower the early part of 23, and then hopefully we'll start to see things pick up, and especially with the purchase orders. That's my prediction.
Well, fingers crossed. Let's hope.
Yeah. Good.
All right. Jim, does that about wrap things up?
Well, thank you all. Thank you so much, Ken and Todd. We really appreciate your time, and we thank all of the listeners that joined us today. We really appreciate everyone's time. If you want to contact them, their information is right there on your screen. If you have any other questions, reach out to comments@Appraisal Buzz. So thanks again to Clear Capital, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.